will be coming up to open us up right there.
All right. Well, good evening, everyone. As Yoonmee shared, my name's Laurence. But yeah, I'm a member of the Justice Ministry. Yoonmee, who just opened up for us, and Hik-young, who she's right there. Thought you might have been on slides. They're both the co-leaders of our ministry here at Exilic. And our goal as a ministry is to approach justice in a biblical way and to work to present and support the work of supporting different communities. Our focus is to educate the church on how to be involved in the work of justice and to participate in this work together. This is why we partnered with NYCAAPIC tonight to discuss the importance of the AAPI vote in this election year. So just some quick housekeeping. First off, shortly there'll be a QR code up on the screen. Scan that. That is a link to follow the NYCAAPIC newsletter and has a lot of great resources. And then second, right over there, you'll see some lovely people at the tables back there with some computers. There are forms and online resources that if you are not registered to vote, either in New York or in New Jersey, you can go up and you can get some assistance to register right after our panel discussion. And then I did want to say lastly, just thank you so much to everybody who came out tonight. And I know we incentivized everyone here to come here for free food. Shout out there. But your presence shows that you want to learn about how to be civically engaged. So as a word of encouragement, I wanted to pick out a encouraging Bible passage. So I picked one out about Jesus talking about the end times. All right, in this passage, Jesus is addressing, in this circumstances, his believers, his followers. And he says, as Matthew 25, verses 34 through 40 says, "Then the king will say to those on his right, 'Come, you are blessed by my Father. Inherit the kingdom prepared for you from the foundation of the world. For I was hungry, and you gave me food. I was thirsty, and you gave me drink. I was a stranger, and you welcomed me. I was naked, and you clothed me. I was sick, and you visited me. I was in prison, and you came to me.' Then the righteous will answer him, saying, 'Lord, when did we see you hungry and feed you, or thirsty and give you drink? And when did we see you a stranger and welcome you, or naked and clothe you? And when did we see you sick or in prison and visit you?' And the king will answer them, 'Truly I say to you, as you did to the one of the least of these, my brothers, you did it to me.'" I just wanted to share this passage as our civic engagement is part of helping the least of these, as Christ shares here, as our vote impacts how we as a city, state, and country look after the people that need justice. And as our wonderful Pastor Aaron shares quite a bit, he tells me he didn't come up with this, but I have no other source, so this goes to him. He shares that justice is not just helping someone who has been mugged at night because it was dark, but justice is helping them and helping to put up lights in order to prevent it from happening again. So just as we continue into our panel discussion, I don't want you to just listen and learn from our wonderful panelists tonight just for yourself. I want you to think about your coworkers, your family, anyone who may come into your life whose voice needs to be heard. I want you to have that in the back of your mind as you listen, to not only listen to the resources that can impact you, but can impact those around you, and that you would be going out from tonight to share those resources with others. So now I'll invite Trevor up to open us up in prayer.
Thank you, Laurence. Yeah, please join me in prayer. Yeah, Lord, we just thank you that you care about every aspect of our life, Lord, that you're involved in our Sunday services, in our prayer, in our small groups, in our work. And Lord, thank you that you care about every sphere of this world, Lord, including our civic governments, our elected officials, Lord. And we just pray your kingdom come, your will be done on earth as it is in heaven, Lord, in our governments, in our elections, And we do pray, Lord, I just agree with Laurence in praying that your heart for the poor and marginalized, praying for that your heart just for all people would be advanced, Lord, through believers being involved in elections and in civic government. And so we just pray all these things in the name of your Son, Jesus Christ. Amen. All right.
Yeah, so I realized I didn't introduce myself, and I tend to do that. I'm Yoonmee Cho. I'm the co-lead of the Justice Ministry with Hee-kyung, who's sitting right over there. But I also just wanted to give a quick shout out also to Laurence for all the planning that he did and for helping out with this event, along with our colleagues from NYCAAPIC. So thank you guys so much. So the next part of the program, we're going to have Grace Pyun join us. She is the founder of GBP Law PLLC, and she's going to be doing a brief presentation for us on how to vote. And then following that, we'll have a panel discussion with Grace, as well as some other folks that I will introduce briefly. But I'll have Grace come up for now.
Hi, everyone. You all enjoy the super authentic Korean food tonight? I was just saying, you don't see mackerel too often for party platters. But anyway, yes, my name is Grace Pyun, and I'm very excited to share two of my passions with you all, which is voter education and Christian values. So before we begin our panel presentation and discussion, I just wanted to give you a very basic overview and primer of what's going on in 2024, especially in New York City and New York State, and what you can do. Obviously, that's part of the spiel here, what you can do to contribute to that. So let's go to the first slide. All right, so 2024 is a really big election year, okay? Everyone knows probably from the news of Trump versus Biden. That everybody probably knows that unless you're hiding under a rock. But we also have, on the federal level, we have one New York State senator who's up for re-election, Kirsten Gillibrand. We have all 26 congressional districts in New York, the House of Representatives, also up for re-election. And then we also have our state and hyperlocal elections also happening this year. We have our New York State legislature. So we have 63 state senators, and we have 150 assembly members. They all have 2-year terms. You're gonna see those people on your ballot. And then we also have, our super hyper-local elections. So we have our local political party elections. So this means, for example, within the Democratic Party in Manhattan, in Brooklyn, in Queens, you have these positions called district leaders and county committee members. And these people are all volunteers. They represent the most grassroots kind of liaisons between their communities in the borough, and they kind of serve as a face and voice for those communities with the New York State, the federal elected officials to know what's going on the ground. So these people are volunteers. They're not paid, but they're elected. So that's why you see them on the ballot. And then you have our local judges. So I can go on about this, but because I'm a lawyer. But in New York, some judge positions are elected and some are appointed. So the ones that are up for election, for example, civil court, which is like small claims, they represent, under I forgot, it was like $25,000 or $50,000. They will be your first kind of branch of judgeships, and then surrogates court. If someone passes away, they administrate your will. So these judges are up for election as well. And you'll be seeing those people on your ballot depending on what borough you live in. I want to give a shout out to my friend Alice Tien here. She's running for actually a local judgeship position in Manhattan. So she's here tonight. She's also a fellow believer. So I just wanted to, point it out, because not everybody knows who our judges are, right? So it's really good to have kind of a face to a name. Oh, yes. So Alice, you want to say hi? Yeah. She's running for the 2nd Judicial District in Manhattan. So that's like part of Chinatown in the Lower East Side. So let's see. All right, so how's it going so far? So you're gonna see all those people, all those names in the ballot in November generally, but there's a whole process that goes through. And we've already had elections so far. And I just want to highlight some of them. We had a special election in February 13, 2024 for the 3rd Congressional District. I don't know if you know the guy on the right, that's George Santos. If you saw him in the news, he was a Republican. He basically got booted out of Congress less than his full term because he lied about everything, about his resume. He's Jewish, you know, stuff like that. So he was up for special election. And I just want to point it out because that election district is Nassau County and Eastern Queens. So that's like, has a significant AAPI population. And it was also a lot of independents, meaning people could swing either way, Democrat or Republican. So that was seen as an important election, so I just want to highlight it to you. Tom Suozzi won, he's the Democrat, he won that district. So that happened. And then we had presidential primaries. That's a whole nother, the presidential primary is a whole nother system, but you might have seen some ads about voting and all that. That just happened April 2nd, but we kind of know who's going to be running, you know, running at that point, right? So that's presidential primaries. But I wanted to go into the primaries other than the presidential primaries, because this is the next thing that's coming up, and it's incredibly important. So the New York primaries are going to be June 25th, right? And what are primaries? Primaries are when there is an election within a political party to see which candidate will represent that political party. So primaries are, within the Democratic Party, if there are 2 candidates running for the same position, they're going to have a primary, which is what I just said there. So, and why am I highlighting primaries? Not just because it's coming up next, but it has a lot of important consequences in New York State, and I'll explain. Okay? In New York, the primary system is a closed primary system, meaning you must be a registered voter within that specific political party to participate in that primary. And you have to register within a certain date. So if you want to register in if you want to participate in the Democratic Party, you know, like 2 candidates are running for state senate for the same seat, and they're going to be primaried. If you want to vote in that, you have to be a registered Democrat, okay? Which means if you are an independent, like I was for many years, you cannot participate in any party primary. You have to be either Democrat, Republican, conservative, working families. So that's one reason. And this is more, I don't know how to put it, but the reality is, and this is just a fact, I'm not trying to, this is nonpartisan, this is just a fact. The fact is that in New York City, at least, okay, the majority of elections are won by Democrats, okay? In the general election, like, the Democrats will usually win by, like, a large margin. And because of that, you have a lot of Democrats in New York, and they span they're like on wide parts of the spectrum, right? You have more conservative Democrats, right, who are more moderate in their policies, and then you have more progressive Democrats. So the Democrats don't agree on all issues all the time either. So that means, just as a factual implication, that many competitive races in New York City will occur during the Democratic primaries. Because when there's a runoff between, like, let's say, a conservative Democrat and a progressive Democrat for the same position, that's a competitive primary. And then it's most likely that the Democrat will win when it runs against the Republican in most districts in New York City. So again, that is a really important deadline. That's why we're highlighting primaries. That's why we're trying to run this today, because the primaries are coming up, and we were just really encouraging people to register to vote. So the deadline for that is June 15, 2024. And this is the New York City link. If you live in New York City, the New York City Board of Elections makes it very easy for you to register to vote. You can just do it online. You need to have a driver's license or your last 4 digits of your social, because only US citizens can currently vote. And then if you want to, we have volunteers in the back, obviously, to also assist you and give you more information if you are not within New York City. All right, so trying to put that into context of the AAPI community and why this is all important. I worked for the redistricting commission that redrew the city council districts, so I'm a little bit, I want to emphasize this here, but this was a redistricting year where all the election districts were redrawn. Whenever you have a census every 10 years, you redraw all the political districts, the congressional, the city council, the local, the state election districts. And redistricting is very, people don't know about it, but it's important because it sets the foundation for your electorate, all right? So if you have a neighborhood that has a large Asian population, for example, right? And those lines are drawn so that that Asian population has a majority vote, right? Then Asians really do have the opportunity to elect a candidate of their choice, right? Meaning an Asian person maybe, right? So that's where redistricting and those lines may be important. It's not a deciding factor, but it is important. And there were a lot of insights that came from the latest census, and that is that the Asian Americans are they are the fastest growing population in the United States and in New York. Okay, so in New York, there are about 1.93 million based on like 2021 data. They represent 9.5 of the state, and 1.27 million live in New York City alone. So New York City represents a large contingent of the Asian American population in New York. Roughly in the last 10 years, New York City gained basically the population the size of Memphis, a whole city, and more than half of that gain was from Asian Americans. So that just kind of tells you where the trend is going here in terms of population. All right, and that shows because of our population growth, New York has a growing number of AAPI elected officials on every level, the local level, the state level, hopefully more on the congressional level. Our panelist here today, City Council member Linda Lee, she was elected the first Korean American female City Council member of her district. Sorry, I didn't put your picture up there, but yeah. You're here in person. That's what matters. But as a result of the latest redistricting cycle, meaning the redistricting efforts of 2020 to 2022, we got our first Asian American state senator, Yoonmee Cho, representing parts of Bensonhurst and Sunset Park. We always had Grace Pyun, she was the first Asian American congressional congresswoman. We created the first Asian majority district in Brooklyn, meaning where Asians are the majority of the population, and as a result, they elected Susan Zhang as, the first, Asian woman elected, city council member elected down there. And then we have Christine Liu, who was also one of the first Asians to be elected in her local North Hempstead town council in Nassau County. So this is where redistricting, this is where population, this is where voting, increasing representation is showing through our electeds. And it's kind of obvious why that's important, right? You have people who understand our cultural background, people who understand the language, people who understand, the specific issues that affect the AAPI community. And as a result, we have had some, small victories for the AAPI community in New York. So Lunar New Year, Diwali are recognized as official school holidays. That's greater visibility. The New York State has just created an AAPI commission to further study the policies and what issues affect the AAPI community in New York State. Certain bills that I'm wrapping up soon. Asian Americans care about, they get advanced, they get advanced and they get passed. All right, so this is my last slide. So just putting that all together, going to 2024, the primaries, knowing that you have all this potential power, the national issues are important, obviously, but the local issues are the ones that affect our quality of life and our lives, right? And these is just like some of the long list of issues, obviously, that affect New York. And these are all things that you want to think about going into when you think about educating yourself, learning about the candidates, what their positions are going into this election. And the primaries, this is kind of what, you should be thinking about and how it matters to you. All right, so that was fun. That's it. If you have any information, you can email me. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Grace. We are going to have time for questions as we do the panels, and Grace is one of the panelists, so we'll just launch straight into that. Don't go away. You can just come have a seat. Yeah, we'll move the slides over. But at this point, I'd like to invite up our other two speakers, New York City Councilwoman Linda Lee. Again, as Grace mentioned, our first Korean-American elected official. One of the first, okay. There we go, fact check. And then we also have Grace Choi, who's also the co-founder of NYCAAPIC. So, strong, intelligent, wonderful ladies. So as we're getting started on the panel, there is this Menti, I don't know technology. There's this Menti thing. If you go to menti.com and put in that code, you should be able to type in any questions that you may have as we go along. And I'm just going to briefly take this moment to really shout out Ki-kyung, my co-lead. None of this would have happened without her. She is absolutely fantastic at marketing, questions, all of this. I do nothing. This is all her. I just am the face. So without further ado, we'll just get started. So how about we just go through, and everyone, if you could just introduce yourselves briefly, what you do, and then maybe answer for us, how does your faith shape your professional life, since we're all here as Christians?
Yeah, I'm Grace Choi. I live in Bed-Stuy, and I'm from Georgia originally. I do national political consulting and organizing for the Asian American community. And it's cool to support people like Linda Lee, the city council member. The question was, how does my faith, what?
How does your faith affect your professional work in this political space as a Christian?
Yeah, I think it affects everything. And the reason why I'm in politics in the first place is because of my Christian faith. I'm a pastor's kid. I grew up in Georgia, and I saw my parents serve the church, not only on Sundays, every day of the week. They spent more time outside of the house serving the church people than they were at home. And then our home was also always unlocked, which I don't know if that's safe, but we were in Georgia in the suburbs. And there were random people who just came in all the time, especially in the summer. Random people from Korea who are somehow now our aunties and uncles and cousins. They're not related to us, but, and then my mom would always be like, you need to bunk up with your sister now because we have someone coming in from Korea. And then you also need to give your Spotty Dotty doll to this other girl, give away her toys. So I was just used to this going back to them being Christians and the pastor and samonim who would just give back to the community. I grew up with that. I think it was a little bit toxic the way they did it, but the takeaway is that their faith drove them to serve the community. And I think I see a lot of people who are actually in politics are pastors' kids or elders' kids or deacons' kids, because there's this, we're called as Christians to serve and love our neighbors. And politics, if it's done the way it's supposed to, is supposed to love and serve our neighbors. So my faith drives everything I do in the public square.
Thanks, Grace. Yeah, it definitely shapes my entire life. I was going to say, I definitely pray a lot these days because there's a lot happening in the city. And we're blamed for everything on the city council, whether it's federal, state issues, it's all, on us. But I think for me in my life, there have been very distinct moments throughout my life where God has had very clear moments where I've seen very clearly how he's opened windows and doors. College, which I know, I didn't realize Gene and I overlapped in college together. But, I think that's really where my faith grew, and sort of like leaving the family home nest and all that stuff. And, then being called to social work, I didn't really understand why, but I was like, I know I want to help people. And then going into nonprofit. So before I took office 2+ years ago, I'm a social worker and was in the nonprofit sector for about 20 years. And that is really what shaped, I think, the reason for why I wanted to go into elected office. And it's crazy because I had this opportunity more than 15 years ago to join as like the second gen leader of one of the oldest and largest nonprofit organizations serving the Korean and AAPI community in New York City, KCS Korean Community Services, which is where I was for 12 years. And it's crazy because before I took that job, I remember praying and I remember God saying to me, because I was like, I don't know what it is I'm meant to do later in life, but all I know is that I need to take this job and be on the ground and understand what the real barriers and challenges are in our community to do whatever it is I'm called for later, whatever that may be. And I have to say that those 12 years at my nonprofit are really probably what were pivotal moments that shaped me wanting to go into office. Because I didn't plan on being, going into office at all. I think it was folks like Congresswoman Grace Pyun who were kind of nudging me, saying you should run, and I was like, no, they're all horrible, corrupt people. I would never want to be part of that. But when you see the local officials and what they do and how much they care, it really sort of shapes you. And before, by the way, I decided to officially run, I went to my pastor, and I was on church leadership at the time, and I said, there are 3 things I really need you to pray for me on. The first thing is protection, because there's going to be attacks from all sides, all angles, social media, in person, everything, right? So God protect me to just stay focused. And the second thing I prayed for was wisdom. And I was like, I need that like godly wisdom and discernment, not like manly wisdom, to just guide me in the right way. And then the third thing I prayed for was humility. I was like, I have to always remember why I'm doing this, who I'm doing it for, and where I come from, and the community that I serve. So thankfully, God has been very true to keeping that promise, because every time, it's very easy to get in this slippery slope, and every time that starts to happen, God is very, kicks me in the butt kind of situation and humbles me like crazy. But I can go into more later about the details, but everything you mentioned, I could give very clear examples of why it's so important for us to get more involved, but yes.
We'll definitely want those examples in a moment. But yeah, Grace, you want to also take a stab at that question?
Sure. I mean, I guess I'm a little late to the game in that sense. I came into faith later in life. Initially I was like, I'm going to be a lawyer. I'm going to kick butt. I started out, I wanted to be cool. So, I started, what, lawyers are not cool? No. But I started out kind of in financial enforcement. Like I did white collar crime with the Department of Justice, and I just wanted to be cool. That my faith had nothing to do with it, honestly. I just wanted to be cool. But I think with working and seeing kind of the imbalance of justice, based on what what the color of your skin, how much money you have, I think really opened my eyes to like, okay, there's like a lot of injustice in this world, and then it's not fair that somebody can get jail time and somebody can just walk away for the same crime based on how good their lawyer was and how much they could pay their lawyer. And so I think just starting to shape my values that way, and then also coincided with maybe going to church more, and realizing like, hey, what am I passionate about? I'm really passionate about connecting with people and solving their problems, like in a real, tangible, like direct way. I think just my legal journey then slowly kind of catered in that direction, where then I got this, I started volunteering more for like civics organizations, voting, education, especially in the AAPI community, and I got that opportunity to work for the the redistricting commission, where we redrew the city council districts, and I was just blown away by how people just really love their community and like really felt for their community. And I know it's just like about, oh, we're drawing a line, like literally just an imaginary election line, but people thought we were like changing their postal code, like changing their borough. They're like, no, the neighborhood of X, Y, and Z must stick together. We love our elected officials. So I think just seeing the passion that people had for their community also kind of entrenched in me, like, wow, like I want to be like those people. I want to care about my community and serve my community and use my gifts and talents that God has given me to serve my community. And I thought that, okay, I think that I'm really good at, I think I'm good at helping people like solve real tangible like quality of life issues, or like just resolving issues and coming to a decision. And I just thought, opening up a law firm where the kind of my business plan, I don't know. I don't know about branding, but it's just like my branding is like, I want to be the neighborhood lawyer that helps people, helps nonprofits, helps community organizations that are doing good work to help them meet their goal. And so, and it also gives me the flexibility to do this work because I am passionate about it. So I'm hoping to, marry those values of service in my faith with what I'm doing.
Thank you. Thank you guys so much for introducing yourselves and sharing about your faith and how this led you here. Because we've now partnered with New York AAPIC for this, Grace, if you could speak a little to why you created New York AAPIC and why in your mind it's so important to be kind of getting the AAPI community engaged civically, and then we can talk maybe Linda and Grace can talk a little bit about like practically speaking how that actually happens.
I just want to really thank Exilic Church again, the Justice Ministry, and Pastor Jean and the other pastor, Aaron. I haven't met you. Sorry, I don't remember for hosting this conversation and collaborating with New York Coalition of AAPI Churches. The New York Coalition of AAPI Churches is one of the 5 chapters nationally. It came out of the Atlanta spa shootings on March 16th, where 6 out of the 8 people who were murdered were Asian women. Women who are our parents' age, or our grandmother's age, or our aunt's ages. And there were 3 women pastors, Asian women pastors, Kathy Kang, Gianna Louie, Sabrina Chan, who are actually university colleagues with Trevor. And they're like, we've had enough. Where's the Asian American church when it comes to people in our community being murdered? And this was at the height of anti-Asian racism, and I think 3/16 was our Asian American George Floyd moment. And so they were like, we need to galvanize the Asian American church and Christian community to be a voting bloc to show that our voice really matters. And so that's why CAAPIC was created. And then New York, unfortunately, we experienced a lot of the brunt of anti-Asian racism and violence. One of our first things we did as our coalition in New York was to do a prayer vigil for Michelle Go, who was murdered, as you know, at the subway in Times Square. And then Christina Yuna Lee, was it? The Korean American woman in Chinatown who was murdered as well in her own home. And so we did a prayer vigil right in the neighborhood and park in Chinatown, basically where she was murdered. And then a year later, everything was in response to all the violence, and so we're doing so many prayer vigils. It was kind of exhausting emotionally. And I remember 2 years ago, it was great because we found that there is a coalition of Black churches and Black pastors called the God Squad. They are focused, I know, it's such a great name, God Squad. Well, great branding, right? We should have something like that too, but anyways. The God Squad also has a van. It's like, they have like God Squad van and they just like roll around. God Squad is a coalition of 100+ Black clergy who are focused on ending gun violence in the community, especially in Brooklyn. They reached out to us through Pastor Guilford Monroe, who's the faith advisor to Mayor Adams. He's amazing, man of God. And he was like, what can we as a Black church do to support the Asian American community? And we said, can you walk with us and pray with us in the streets where our community has experienced so much pain, but also the streets where our community also experiences celebration and rejoicing. And so we did our walk of faith with the Black clergy and community. The God Squad, they led the march, and it was beautiful. It was like some of these black pastors have never been to Chinatown, never eaten Asian food, never had a boba.
Yeah, I remember you guys
Do you
ate
remember
together,
that?
didn't you? Yeah.
Yeah,
You said you
they're
had
like, this is
brought them all
good.
to.
Boba's so good. Anyways, so that's why we established the
Shout out to Boba.
New York Coalition of AAPI churches, not only to serve our community of Asian American Christians, but also to know that as Christians, we can partner with other Christians of different backgrounds and other non-Christians who are of any background. We just want to show that we are part of the fabric of society where you are advocating for justice and advocating for your communities.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, I think to that point, maybe Linda, could you speak to a bit more about how, as a church community, we could come together and either work with the government, get engaged and things like that? Because I think a lot of times we just feel like we don't really know where to get started, what resources there are, what we're supposed to be doing. And given that there are other churches of other ethnicities and races that have been kind of engaged in this work, maybe more politically than the Asian churches, could you speak a little bit more about how we could kind of work together?
Yeah, it's interesting. This is almost where I feel like the first gen have it down, where they're actually very, from what I can tell in Queens anyway, like the first gen AAPI community is actually pretty civically engaged, but it's the younger second gen that is actually not as engaged politically or civically, which I find very interesting, because we're now at a place where our generation could actually, we're in different fields, we're in different sectors, we're now leaders in, law and government, and yet we're not, as a church, coming together to say these are issues that are very important to us as a community, which I think is very interesting. So, and to be honest, in my time at KCS, actually we partnered a lot with government as well as faith-based leaders, right? And I'll give you prime examples. When it comes to outreach with hepatitis B and C or diabetes prevention, because those are very prevalent issues in our community, we actually relied very heavily on the church communities and then partnered with government to get funding to be able to provide those services. So the churches are very important and crucial because they have access, right? And I think if we can get more plugged in and bring that access to the community, I think that would actually open a lot of doors. And the other example I'll give is, we, in the city, under Mayor de Blasio, they had Thrive NYC, and mental health first aid training was one of the components that was very successful. Mental health first aid training is meant to be just like a really initial touch point to train folks. These are the signs and symptoms of mental health. And I was actually shocked because I thought first-gen pastors, because, we grew up in a generation where it's like, oh, just pray harder, right? And it'll go away, But the reason why mental health is so important for me personally is because, I have family members and close friends that have severe mental illness, and no one ever talked about it in my family, ever. And so when I was at KCS, one of the things I did was, it took me 4 years, but we started a state-licensed outpatient mental health clinic, specifically geared towards the Korean community, because there's language barriers, cultural barriers there, and I didn't know where to send people who came to us. Yeah. But the churches are the front lines, right? Because they're gonna talk, people in your congregation, they're gonna talk to the pastors, they're not gonna talk to a social worker, right? And so we actually partnered with a lot of the first-gen pastors who surprisingly were like hungering for this almost, because I think that they even got to a place where they're like, okay, this is like a legit spiritual issue and this is a legit mental health issue, and they started understanding the distinction between the two. And so we were able to partner again with government, faith-based leaders, and nonprofits to bring those issues to light. And this is where I think having a voice and seat at the table is so important, is that when I first started my work at KCS, I would go to city council members and say, hey, diabetes is a huge issue in our community. And they would say, oh, really? Where's the data? And I'm like, hold on a second. Because our communities are newer, so there's not as much research and data with our communities. And so we actually did a lot of partnership with NYU School of Medicine, because at the time they had something, they still have actually, I should say, Center for the Study of Asian American Health. So what they do is they partner with nonprofits, faith-based organizations, because they know we have access into the community, and then they do the academia research part of it. So we were actually able to work with K-Town restaurants, H Mart, to say, hey, diabetes is a huge issue. So what you need to do is put the salty, little shaker symbol next to your menu items to say you can have lower sodium options, right? And then also for H Mart, it's like psychologically when you're shopping, you go for the things that are eye level, right? So can you put healthier options at eye level versus like down below or up above? Like don't put all the ramyun and stuff, like right in here. But there's a whole section. But so there were a lot of creative things we did, and it got to the place where we were able to finally push the needle with funding as well as resources, because we at the time were part of a coalition where it was 10% and growing, because we were 10% of the population of New York City at the time. Now we're more than 18. And at the time, 18% are Asian Americans in New York, yeah. So, but we still only get about a little over 1% of all city funding. And we have a budget, by the way, in case you didn't know, New York City has a budget of $110 billion. New Jersey,
110 how much?
billion. New Jersey's entire state budget is $54 billion. So just put that into context, right? So there's a very, very big, there's a lot, but the thing is, that's the thing, is that now as council members, along with a lot of the folks in the community, we're able to say, like, no, these are the things that we need funding for that are important in our issue, in our community. These are the things that we need to pay more attention to. But without having that seat at the table, it's really, really hard, or that voice, it's hard to get that push. So that's where I think we need to partner more with faith-based, and it's very much, it's part of our daily community. You may not see it, but it's definitely very much a part of our daily lives.
Yeah, that's a really wonderful example. Practically speaking, if you can put that in context, so how do we, because I hear you saying that basically we're 18% of the population, yet we're only receiving like 1% of the funding because our voices aren't being heard at these kind of city like levels to say like we need this, we need that, right? Which I think historically Asians are kind of not that great at kind of asking for stuff. So how do we ask for stuff?
So just to give an example.
Ask for $1 billion.
Yeah, I know, right? Exactly.
$1 billion.
No, but to the presentation that you made earlier, right? So just let me give you an example. So my district actually has, so there's 51 council members. Sandra Ung in Flushing has the highest percentage of Asian Americans. I didn't know this, but I actually have the second highest at 45%. But my district is very much evenly split between the South Asian community, which includes the Bangladesh Muslim, Sikh Punjabi, Malayali from Kerala, right? So I have all the different South Asian groups. And then on the other side, we have Chinese and Koreans, as well as other Asians. But so we're 45% of the entire district. Each district is about 175,000 people, right? Out of that, you get maybe like 10 or 15,000 people at most that will vote in the elections, in the primaries, right? At most, you'll get like around 15,000. Brooklyn, I think, which has one of the highest turnout, there's one district in Brooklyn that has about 30,000 people that vote, but most districts, it's like on average maybe 15,000. Of that 15,000 people who vote, 70% in my district, at least, are over the age of 50 and white. So these are the people that are deciding who is representing our voices and who has a seat at the table. And I will say this, I spoke to a very prominent elected official in New York who shall remain nameless. Okay, so definitely remain nameless. And I basically asked this person, like, oh, you actually have a significant number or a decent number of Asian Americans in your district, like, and then the response was, oh, do they vote? And I was like, well, typically no, then I don't care. And that's literally the response that I got is, if you do not vote, they're not gonna pay attention to our voices. And I think this is why the voter registration, which I know a lot of churches do, and getting plugged in is super, super important. Even being part of your community boards. I don't know how many of you guys are part of community boards, but they are severely underrepresented by our community. So just finding ways, it doesn't have to be running for office. There's so many different ways to get involved with community boards, district leaders, other things that I think are very crucial to just have that voice in the community.
So much, Linda. That's startling stats, but good to know, because I think that kind of helps paint a picture of like kind of what the landscape is and why it's so important for us to be doing what we're doing here. Grace, you had talked a bit like kind of during your presentation and things like that. And actually, because we have a question about it, So more like kind of on an individual level, I know you're super passionate about this, like how can we be getting more involved on an individual level? How can we kind of engage our friends who are like not that interested in, you know, the elections, things like that? What could we be doing? Like it sounds like maybe, I don't know, sharing some of these stats, like what would you say you would recommend? And this question is like, how do you know about kind of what these local issues are and what candidates are running on?
Yeah, I mean, it's hard. I mean, number one, most people are not that interested. It's like a boring people find it boring. I love it, but you know, when I start talking about like, oh, local community issues, they're like, okay, whatever. And I know that everyone is like super busy, like the jobs overwhelmed, like nobody has time for extracurricular activities. So just as a starting point, what I recommend to people, just very low key, is like follow your elected officials on Instagram or social media and sign up for their newsletters, right? Because they tell you like, hey, this is what's going on in our community. So like each city council member has like a newsletter, email newsletter. Join their email subscribe list. The community board, Councilmember Linda Lee was just talking about it. Community boards, there's 59 community boards. They represent kind of like the local grassroots community voices, or should at least. But there are 59 community boards, and you should find out which community board you are part of. And they also have newsletters, and they provide a very comprehensive, like, this is what's going in your neighborhood. Like, there's fairs, there's meetings, there's a police precinct council meeting. So it just kind of gives you an overview. Like, even if you don't go to these meetings, it gives you can read their minutes, you can read their agenda, you know kind of what just is generally going on in your neighborhood, like what issues are affecting the community. So if anything, you can educate yourself, right? You can just follow Instagram, get those newsletters on email and just kind of start reading them is a starting point, I would say. And for local election, so the candidates who are running, I know like if you're like me, sometimes you're just like last minute, the day of the election, you're kind of like Googling who they are. The New York City Board of Elections they mail you these like packets of the candidates, and they have statements of like what the candidate platforms are. They usually send those out like in advance, so you should definitely not ignore that and read through it. But starting in May, you can go to the Board of Elections and find out who's going to be on your ballot. Like, there's a sample ballot, and all the candidate names, like for the primary, are going to be there, and you can always Google them and look them up and just look up what their issues are, or Instagram them, right? A lot of them have a social media presence, a lot of them have Twitter presence, so that's another way. What I also like doing is signing up for local newspapers. Some of them have biases. Some are muckraking newspapers. They want to sniff out stories, but it's still good because like you get to know like what's going on in City Hall. Like what's the city council fighting about? Like it gives you the issues. Like the city is one. A city and state. It's free. I think City and State's also a good one. They kind of give you the headlines. It's kind of like they give you the headlines of what's going on in New York City, New York State. So the first step is educating yourself. And then if you do have time commitments, if you want to commit time, there's joining the community board. Like, joining your community board as a member. I think applications, they vary. I think they may have passed already at this point. Yeah, they passed. But it's a 2-year term. So look it up. I don't want to go into the whole spiel about community board, but you can definitely look it up. Look up your community board and look it up in the borough. So that's small steps. No one's forcing you to like be an expert on these things. But just if you read the New York Times article, the front headline pages every day, or the Wall Street Journal or Twitter, then you definitely have time to like read City and State and monthly newsletters.
Okay, read the news. That's the takeaway. There's also these QR codes that are kind of all around too, that if you like pull up on your phone, there's like a whole list of resources. Again, Heekyung is amazing, and I've kind of pooled a bunch of this kind of stuff together. So if you want to kind of snap that on your phone, you can kind of look at the resources there, and we kind of like update it as we go. So there'll always be kind of like new information up there. I think there was a question before, but now it's gone. There was a question about like what are the issues that are facing the AAPI community. I know you spoke about one, the mental health, the work that you've been doing, as well as kind of like diabetes and things like that. I guess how do we kind of get more proximate to figuring out what the issues are for our communities? If anyone wants to kind of take that, maybe Linda, you want to go first?
You know, and it's interesting because even when we're talking about the AAPI community, we're very much diverse in all of our views, right? So this is something important to remember. God, how would you describe it? I guess in the grand scheme of New York City politics, I'm more on the moderate side of things, but I go left on issues depending on what they are. My district is very moderate. Like George Santos, he represented part of my city council district. So that just gives you a sense of moderate Dem, yes. But the funny thing though is that I say moderate Dem as in like New York City moderate. I call myself a New York City moderate Dem because I think outside of New York City I'd be actually considered pretty progressive. So it's all relative, you know what I mean? So, but that's not to say I don't work with my colleagues. Like I have a Republican to the north of me. I have in Western Queens, you know, a socialist who's there as a Democratic socialist. But you know what? I get along with all of them and we try to find out where we can align on a bunch of issues. And I think that's one of the things, sadly, that has been forgotten these days is just human decency and how to talk to one another and reach across the aisle and actually build coalition to push things forward. But in terms of issue areas for the AAPI community, the things that I hear about a lot that are being debated even within our own community is how to approach public safety and how to approach education, right? Like those are two of the things that I hear about the most. And we're not always gonna agree on those things, you know, because there's, around public safety, policing, there's a lot of aspects there. And I think when it comes to, by the way, what makes people get involved or what makes you care, like, sanitation issues, for example, are a big issue in the city when we have a rat problem. Yeah. But right, we have a rat czar. Actually, I'm being serious. But so there's it depends. But the school system. So I know a lot of people criticize the NYPD and their budget, which is about 11 or 12 billion. But I gotta say, the largest agency budget is Department of Education at 33 billion. Which a lot of people don't understand. And I gotta say, to me, that's the more frustrating one because it is not transparent at all. And when you're talking about $33 billion to our schools, and we still don't have students who can read, we still don't have enough resources, you know, why is that when we have one of the best, you know, budgets for the school districts? And so, there's a lot of issues depending on what is important in terms of how you can get involved. And just on another side note, one thing that we have as city council members, which the state electeds do not have, is discretionary money. So we have access to $5 million each, minimum, to be able to give out to nonprofit organizations in our community. And then we have additional money on top of that to be able to give out for capital projects at schools, parks, other things. So actually, knowing your council members is great because if you can get on their radar and tell them about the issues and groups and things that you want to see funded, they can actually put some funding into it. And if we don't have enough money, we go to our speaker who has a big pot of money, and those things can actually get pushed along. And the other issue that is important, I think, for some folks in our community is around housing. And one of the reasons why the city council is very powerful in New York is because we have a lot of say and discretion when it comes to land use and zoning changes, right? So anything in New York City that wants to get developed, if there's zoning changes that need to be made to account for housing or other types of buildings to be built, that happens at the city council level. So that is also another thing that is important for a lot of folks that I see people getting involved with is around the housing issue.
Wait, so the $5 million discretionary fund, nonprofits can apply, but what about churches?
With churches, it's harder. Yeah, it's usually the nonprofit organizations, but interestingly, churches now are opening up 501c3s in the nonprofit sector to provide services as well. So they could apply under that
I've
branch.
seen where churches have applied for city funding, so how does that work?
There's some, I gotta look at that because any 501c3 can apply, but usually it's the nonprofits that will end up getting the funding. Yeah.
I mean, because it just makes me think, like, too, because obviously we have our Justice Ministry arm, but we also have our outreach arm as well, and so we are partnering with lots of nonprofit organizations that are helping and in the community, the AAPI community, stuff like that. So there's ways for us to still, I think, get proximate and understand the issues that, you know, our fellow Asians, Christians are all facing, and so that's a way, I think, where we could probably figure out kind of what some issues areas are. In terms of, and I want to be mindful of time because I know you have to go, but so we will release you shortly. But is there a way for, how do we get our churches to kind of come together? Is there more strength in like churches, like Asian churches coming together and all of that? Yeah, this is your coalition question. Linda, should I release you now?
Oh, no, go, yeah.
You sure?
How do we bring our churches together?
Well, so how do we gain more power? Like we're talking about like just us as like Exilic or us as standalone churches. Like is that as effective, or is there a way to come together to make our voices heard in a more kind of powerful way?
The Coalition of AAPI churches.
It's a time to plug.
Yeah. So I think it's great that we have Exilic Church, and we also have Three Stone and OCM and 180 Church. Yeah, a lot of Chinatown churches are our biggest partners with our Coalition of API churches, mostly second-gen folks. They're like eager, they're like looking, and I think it's really exciting to see churches like Exilic that have a lot of second-gen young professionals who have a justice ministry committed to learning about civics and educating our church community. So I think all the Hope churches can do it, but whatever church you're from, you represent, you should ask them, how can we partner with the New York Coalition of API churches? I want to talk to Grace and Trevor and Yoonmee and Hee-kyung and Maria and everyone here. So I think that's one way, because when you bring our collective voices together, we have more power because we're seen as a block, like a voting block. So then they listen. So then they take us more seriously. So if we're like, these three are the main issues that all of our Asian churches or Asian Christian community in New York cares about, they will be more apt to listen. And if we have some very specific ways, programs, policies, legislation we propose, they're more likely to listen to us. And then we can work with people like City Council member Linda Lee and all the other Asian City Council members, especially the Christian ones who want to work with us. But they can also influence their colleagues to then create a block of City Council members who can also support what our coalition wants to do. Right?
Great, yeah. Power in numbers. So I want to just be mindful of our speakers' time. So it's 7:35. So I think we'll actually end here. But I know both Graces are able to kind of spend some time. If anyone wants, I know there's a bunch of actually really great questions up there. If anyone wants to come and speak with them, we're going to still have our folks helping out with voter registration, things like that, the QR codes, a ton of food, so please eat more. But I just wanted to say very much thank you to all three of you up here today, especially Councilwoman Linda Lee. Both Graces did an amazing job preparing this presentation, and thank you again for coming. We really appreciate it.